This woman, her name is Raven, is 26 years old, works in law enforcement, and she's absolutely convinced that her ex-boyfriend destroyed their 3-year relationship because he couldn't handle dating a woman with experience. But as her story unfolds, you'll discover layers of deception, betrayal, and justifications that will leave you questioning everything about honesty in relationships. I'm Emma, your storyteller here at Mrs. Emma, and this tale is one of the most controversial stories I've ever shared with you. Stay with me until the end, because what starts as a simple breakup story becomes something far more complicated. Raven entered law enforcement at 22, fresh from academy training. She found herself as one of very few women surrounded by male officers in her department. The environment was intense, demanding, and she adapted quickly, perhaps, as she admits, too quickly for some people's comfort. When she encountered Phoenix 3 years ago, she believed she'd finally discovered a partner mature enough to understand her world. He was 35 at the time, established in his career with a stable office position. He appeared different from her colleagues, calmer, more grounded, without the aggressive intensity that characterized many in her profession. He was recovering from infidelity in his previous relationship, and Raven thought this meant he'd value loyalty. She couldn't have been more mistaken about what was coming. From their very first days together, Phoenix exhibited anxiety about faithfulness, constantly asking about her location, inquiring about her colleagues, making remarks about her job as though it threatened their connection. Raven understood his ex-partner had hurt him deeply, but his constant vigilance quickly became exhausting. Normal conversations would somehow transform into interrogations. "Who were you speaking with at the station today?" She was building her career in a challenging field, and she didn't believe she needed to account for every professional interaction. Despite her frustration, she tried to accommodate his fears, hoping time would bring him peace and help him realize she wasn't the person who'd betrayed him before. They spent months casually dating before making their relationship official. During this period, he kept probing about her history within the department. One evening, after she'd had several drinks, nothing excessive, just enough to lower her guard, he brought up the topic again with unusual gravity. She decided to be transparent. Yes, she'd been involved with a couple of colleagues before meeting him. In her view, this was natural when working 12-hour shifts alongside the same people. Connections developed organically in high-pressure environments. She believed honesty was what he wanted. He always emphasized communication and trust. So when he asked directly, she provided a genuine response. 2 men, both casual situations without serious emotional investment. She expected appreciation for her candor. Instead, his expression shifted. Not to anger exactly, but to something worse. That analytical processing he applied to everything. This should have warned her that he struggled with accepting her life before him. The situation frustrated her immensely. Here she was, being completely transparent about her past, and he reacted as though she'd committed a personal offense against him. Meanwhile, she was certain he hadn't lived as a monk before they met. Yet somehow her history became this enormous issue requiring endless analysis and discussion. She tried explaining that everything happened before they were together, that it didn't affect their current relationship. He simply nodded and changed subjects, a classic avoidance move. Ask for honesty, then prove unable to handle the honest answer. About a year into their relationship, Phoenix continued making subtle comments whenever she mentioned spending time with colleagues or received work-related messages. His behavior was becoming unbearable. She was trying to build a serious career, and professional networking was essential to that goal. But every time she came home and mentioned interactions with coworkers or attending department functions, his tone would shift. Not exactly jealous, but as if he was mentally keeping score. She bent over backward, trying to make him feel secure. Constant text updates during her shifts, sharing every mundane detail of her day, even avoiding certain colleagues to maintain peace. But insecure partners are never satisfied. They simply find new concerns to obsess over instead of addressing their own underlying issues. Then he confronted her with what he called a serious conversation. He'd been thinking about what she'd disclosed that night they'd been drinking. Thinking for an entire year, apparently, like some detective working a cold case. He wanted to know if there was anything else she hadn't mentioned about her romantic past. The way he asked, formal, intense, arms crossed, made clear he wouldn't drop this until she revealed absolutely everything in exhaustive detail. Fine. She decided to lay everything out since he clearly wouldn't let it rest. Yes, there had been more than just 2 men over the years. Maybe 15 or 20 encounters. Honestly, who maintains exact counts of casual interactions? These happened over 4 years in a high-stress profession. She wasn't documenting them in some journal. Some occurred at different stations during rotations and training assignments throughout her career development. What absolutely infuriated her was his reaction, as though she'd deliberately deceived him the entire time. She never lied about anything. When he asked about a couple of coworkers, she told him about a couple. When he demanded a complete detailed inventory of her entire romantic history, she provided that too. That isn't lying, it's answering the specific question actually asked. But suddenly, she became the dishonest person in this situation. His expression when she explained the full scope was pathetic, as if she'd personally betrayed him by having an actual life and relationships before they met. He asked incredibly detailed questions. When exactly did things happen? Where did they occur? Were any of them married? Did other people know? It was honestly invasive. Why did ancient history matter to their current relationship? These were all adults making their own choices about their lives. If some happened to have girlfriends or wives at the time, that was their business to handle with their own partners, not her responsibility to police or monitor. What truly bothered her was how he made it sound like she was some predator systematically seducing innocent coworkers. These men pursued her just as often as she ever approached them. Half the time they initiated contact or suggested meeting after work. Yet somehow in his distorted version, she was this manipulative person, deliberately targeting and corrupting unsuspecting colleagues. After that conversation, everything between them changed, and not positively. Following Phoenix's precious full disclosure about her past, he became completely different. Cold, distant, constantly watching her as if waiting for her to make some mistake. It was absolutely draining. Every text message she received, every late shift, every casual mention of a colleague's name, she could see him mentally cataloging it all like evidence for some future prosecution. But instead of ending the relationship if he had such fundamental problems with who she was, he stayed and made both their lives miserable with silent treatments and suspicious glances. Then last year, everything collapsed. She was experiencing an incredibly difficult period at work. A new supervisor who clearly had issues with confident women, dealing with mentally exhausting cases, working constant overtime. She needed genuine support, someone to talk to who understood the unique pressures and stress of her profession. Cade from another unit reached out around that time. They'd collaborated on several cases, had good professional rapport, and he was navigating his own relationship troubles with his live-in girlfriend. When he suggested meeting to decompress and discuss work challenges, it seemed perfectly reasonable and innocent, 2 colleagues supporting each other through difficult times. But she knew Phoenix would completely overreact based on his history of jealousy and insecurity. So she figured what he didn't know couldn't hurt anyone. They met at a bar across town, initially just talking about work stress and personal problems. Cade was dealing with serious relationship issues too, and it felt amazing connecting with someone who actually understood her world instead of constantly questioning it. One thing led to another that night, and yes, they ended up at his place. But here's what everyone needs to understand. It wasn't some grand romantic affair or emotional betrayal. It was simply 2 people who needed each other in that specific moment. Physical stress relief between adults who understood each other's situations. This happens frequently in high-pressure careers where people depend on each other for survival. Her only mistake was maintaining contact with Cade afterward, sending him some photographs to keep their connection alive. Nothing wildly inappropriate, just some images to maintain what they'd shared. But apparently Cade saved or screenshot them somehow, because when Phoenix went through her phone like some kind of stalker while she was showering, everything exploded. He completely violated her privacy by accessing her personal messages, which should tell you everything about his character, and discovered the conversation thread with Cade. Worse, he didn't even give her a chance to explain the context or circumstances. Just started yelling about how she'd cheated, how she'd lied to him again, how she was exactly the type of person he'd suspected from the beginning. It was completely unfair and one-sided. After the Cade situation detonated, Raven tried absolutely everything to repair things with Phoenix and save their relationship. She offered complete transparency, all her passwords, location sharing on her phone, whatever he needed to feel secure again. But he acted like such a dramatic victim about the whole situation, as if she'd committed some unforgivable crime instead of having a human moment of weakness during a stressful period. The silent treatment, sleeping on the couch, barely communicating unless absolutely necessary for household matters. It was like living with an angry ghost, determined to punish her indefinitely. What truly frustrated her was that he couldn't or wouldn't see how his own behavior had pushed her toward Cade initially. She'd been telling him for months that she needed more emotional support. That work was becoming incredibly intense, that she felt disconnected from him and their relationship. But instead of stepping up as the supportive partner she needed, he kept obsessing over her past relationships and making her feel guilty for having normal human experiences before they met. So when Cade offered understanding and connection that she wasn't getting at home, of course she was tempted. Any reasonable person would understand that basic cause and effect. She tried explaining this dynamic to Phoenix during one of their discussions, really just her talking while he sat like a judgmental stone wall. She told him directly that if he'd been more emotionally present, more supportive of her career stress, more understanding about the unique pressures of her job, she never would have needed to find that connection and support elsewhere. That seemed to anger him even more, as if she was making excuses for her behavior instead of explaining the actual reality of what happened. But she wasn't making excuses. She was explaining how relationships actually work in the real world. People have emotional and physical needs, and when those needs aren't being met at home by their partner, they naturally find ways to meet them elsewhere. That's just basic human psychology and behavioral patterns. The breaking point came when he started investigating her past relationships again, because apparently ruining their present wasn't sufficient punishment. Not content with analyzing every current interaction she had, he had to examine every relationship she'd ever mentioned. He found old message threads on her social media. Nothing recent or relevant, just old conversations from years ago with men she'd worked with at various points. But suddenly those became evidence of some supposed pattern of inappropriate behavior, as if having a social life and staying friendly with former coworkers somehow made her a serial cheater, or something equally absurd. The connections he was making were honestly unhinged. He even researched some of these men online, discovered which ones were married or in serious relationships when they'd been involved, then had the audacity to lecture her about helping people cheat and being complicit in breaking up families. As if she was supposed to conduct detailed background checks on every man who showed interest in her. As if their relationship status was somehow her responsibility to police and monitor. That's when she realized she was dealing with someone who fundamentally didn't understand how the real adult world actually operates. The end came about 3 weeks before she shared her story, and she describes it as the most unfair and manipulative experience she'd ever had in a relationship. Phoenix had been acting strange for several days, not angry or upset anymore, just eerily calm and detached, as if he'd made some major decision about their future that he wasn't sharing. She should have recognized the warning signs when he started asking loaded questions about complete honesty and what she really wanted from their relationship moving forward. Red flags everywhere. But she actually thought maybe he was finally ready to move past all the drama and negativity, to work on rebuilding what they'd had together. Maybe he'd finally matured enough to understand that real adult relationships require forgiveness, compromise, and accepting that people aren't perfect. She was completely wrong about his intentions. Turns out he'd spent weeks playing detective with her personal life, reviewing old messages, even tracking down and contacting some of her former coworkers online behind her back. Imagine this grown man spending his free time investigating people from her past like some obsessed teenager with nothing better to do. What he found, or what he believed he found, was supposed evidence that she'd been dishonest about the timeline of some of her past relationships. Apparently, there was some overlap between when things were happening with Cade and when Phoenix and she had started getting more serious. Okay, maybe the timing wasn't absolutely perfect, but they definitely weren't exclusive or committed yet when that was occurring. She never claimed she was sitting at home doing nothing, waiting around for him to decide what he wanted during those early months when they were casually dating. But Phoenix had constructed this elaborate narrative in his head about how she'd been lying and manipulating him from day one of their relationship. How she deliberately deceived him into thinking she was someone completely different than who she actually was. The worst part was how he presented all his findings like he was some prosecutor in a courtroom laying out evidence against a criminal defendant. He had dates, screenshots, even testimony from people he'd contacted and questioned behind her back about her past behavior. It was completely humiliating, invasive, and so far beyond the boundaries of normal relationship conduct. But when she tried to defend herself and explain the context behind everything he'd uncovered, he just shut her down completely. Said he didn't want to hear more lies and manipulation from her. More lies? Everything she'd ever told him was the truth, just not necessarily every single detail of her entire personal history. There's a huge difference between actually lying and simply not volunteering information that wasn't directly asked for. If he'd wanted a complete accounting of every relationship and encounter she'd ever had, he should have requested that specific thing up front instead of setting these bizarre traps and tests. The conversation ended with him delivering an ultimatum that was completely insulting. Either she admit to being a serial cheater and commit to his absurd plan of accountability and rebuilding trust, or he was done with their relationship. His plan was absolutely insane. Complete transparency about everything. No contact with any male coworkers outside of required work duties. Regular check-ins about her whereabouts. Basically treating her like some criminal on parole. She told him exactly what she thought of that degrading idea, and that was that. 6 months later, Raven claims she's doing absolutely fine. Better than fine, actually. Phoenix can continue playing the victim role to anyone who'll listen to his sob story, but the truth is, he did her a huge favor by leaving when he did. She was growing tired of walking on eggshells around his insecurities and constantly having to defend herself for living a normal life. Dating someone who actually trusts you and doesn't interrogate you about your past is vastly better than dealing with constant suspicion and having to prove yourself repeatedly. She's seeing someone new now, another person in law enforcement, which she knows would absolutely drive Phoenix crazy if he found out. But Sterling gets it. Gets the job demands, gets the stress, gets that sometimes you need to decompress with people who understand your world and what you deal with daily. They don't have exhausting conversations about her romantic history, because he's an actual adult who understands that everyone has a past and experiences that shaped who they are. What's really ironic is how Phoenix thought leaving her would somehow punish her, or make her realize what she'd supposedly lost with him. But all it did was show her how much better she could do, and how much happier she could be with the right person. Sterling and she have been together 4 months now, and she's never felt more appreciated or understood in a relationship. He doesn't go through her phone like some paranoid investigator, doesn't interrogate her about coworkers or friends, doesn't make her feel guilty for having normal human friendships and connections. It's like breathing fresh air after being suffocated for 3 years. The best part? Phoenix has been absolutely miserable since their breakup. She hears things through mutual friends, how he's been trying to date but can't seem to connect with anyone. How he's become this bitter, suspicious person who analyzes every woman he meets for potential red flags and warning signs. One friend told her he actually asked for advice about properly vetting potential partners to avoid another situation like with her, as if she was some cautionary tale instead of someone who genuinely loved him despite all his flaws and issues. He's also been spreading his version of their story to anyone who'll listen, painting himself as this innocent victim who was betrayed and manipulated by his cheating girlfriend. But most people can see through that narrative, especially when they hear about how controlling and invasive he became toward the end. Nobody wants to date someone who's going to treat them like a suspect in their own relationship. Meanwhile, she's absolutely thriving in every area of her life. Her career is going great. She just received recognition for her work on a major case that'll probably help with promotions. Her personal life is stable and completely drama-free. She has a partner who supports and encourages her instead of constantly tearing her down and questioning her choices. The contrast between her life now and what she had with Phoenix couldn't be more obvious. What really gets her is that he had every opportunity to work through their problems like mature adults. She was willing to compromise to address his concerns, to rebuild trust in reasonable ways. But instead of putting in actual effort, he chose to punish her for being a normal human being with a past. He wanted some perfect fantasy woman with no history, no complications, no real-world experience or relationships. Well, good luck finding that imaginary person who doesn't actually exist, she thinks. The reality is that adult relationships require work, forgiveness, understanding, and accepting that your partner had a full life before they met you. If you can't handle those basic facts, maybe you shouldn't be in serious relationships with real people. And that's Raven's story as she tells it. Now I want to ask you something. As you listened to this story unfold, what did you think? Did you find yourself sympathizing with Raven's perspective? Or did you notice something else? A pattern of justifications, a refusal to take genuine accountability, a version of events where she's always the victim of someone else's insecurities rather than someone who made deliberate choices that hurt her partner? This is one of those stories where the truth often lives somewhere between the lines of what's being said. Relationships are complicated. Trust takes years to build and moments to destroy. And sometimes, the way we tell our own stories reveals more about us than the actual events themselves. What are your thoughts? Do you think Phoenix was too insecure and controlling? Or do you think Raven's pattern of behavior justified his concerns? Where do you draw the line between having a past and being accountable for your choices in a relationship? I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments below. If this story made you think, if it sparked something in you, whether agreement, disagreement, or just complex feelings, please hit that like button. Share this video with friends who love diving into complicated relationship dynamics like we do here. And most importantly, subscribe to Mrs. Emma. I share stories like this regularly. Real, raw, complicated human experiences that make us think about trust, honesty, and what we truly owe each other in relationships. Don't miss the next story. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you're always part of our community here. Thank you for listening. I'm Emma, and I'll see you in the next story.